Hello everyone. I'm here in place of Dr. Adrian Morford, who couldn't provide this presentation today. And I have to admit, it might be a little bit loose. I guess, only one thing scares me more than public speaking, and that's climate change. So anyway, here I am. Look, today's presentation, Adrian's asked me to talk about the benefits of biochar in combating the climate emergency. And I suppose, before we get into the nitty-gritty, there are really two benefits. One is that the process of creating biochar from a sustainable biomass feedstock, trees or plants or whatever, is a way of removing carbon from the atmospheric and atmospheric plant carbon cycle, so you can freeze out carbon from being re-emitted into the atmosphere. The second thing is that the properties of the biochar itself, which is actually, who's heard of biochar? Anyone not heard of biochar? One, okay. I'll give you a bag. You can if you want. I wouldn't eat too much. Your teeth look pretty bad after you've chewed on biochar. Actually, a friend of mine who used to work at Adrian, he would brush his teeth with biochar once a week. He reckoned that was really good. Look, the biochar effectively is somewhere between the sort of charcoal that you buy at Bunnings for cooking with and activated carbon. It's slightly different from both. It's kind of in between the two, I suppose. But the second benefit of biochar, apart from its ability to freeze out CO2 from the atmospheric carbon cycle, is that it has benefits in soil health and enables a certain improved level of resilience to things like drought and nutrient deficiency and things like this. So it's, it effectively imparts absorption and higher surface area, higher pore volume characteristic to soils. So plants, by and large, actually love this stuff, and it's particularly beneficial in areas where there's slightly acidic soils, like most of Australia, or sandy soils, like a lot of Australia. And basically it enables nutrients and water to be held better than the original soil would. And it can actually be used to improve some of the degraded lands that we've kind of perhaps over-farmed and overused and are now resorting to something I would refer to as open air hydroponics to grow a lot of our crops, our monoculture crops. So biochar is, I guess, an easy way to restore some health to the soil. Some have referred to it as the coral reef of the soil because of its ability to house and promote the growth of beneficial soil microorganisms. The main key thing that I'm trying to get across in this presentation is about how and where the production of biochar is beneficial in terms of carbon drawdown, because there are certain situations in which making biochar through pyrolysis is just actually not really going to help. So it all comes down to where did the biomass come from which you are making this char. That's the important question. If a big company comes along and says, we're going to clear this old growth forest for a new housing development, and but don't worry, because we're going to turn all of the waste wood into biochar. Well, you know, get stuffed. You may as well just keep burning coal out of a brown coal mine, because that's really not going to have any net benefit, because you're not regrowing the trees from which you've recovered the carbon. Okay. Now, the pyrolysis technology that biochar, that we create biochar using, is, in simple terms, just heating up wood in the absence of oxygen. So what that does is it drives off all the moisture, drives off all the so-called volatile species out of the wood, which are sort of oily, tarry, essential oil things, and they all burn off. And that does actually emit carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. But what's left afterwards is effectively almost entirely pure carbon. So 1 tonne of biochar, 1 tonne of carbon, has effectively drawn down the equivalent of about 3.6, 3.7 tonnes of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, because of the fact that CO2 has 2 O's to 1 C and biochar is just entirely C. So before I go into more details, just a quick background about the company that I work for and that Adrian works for. Earth Systems is a multidisciplinary environmental consulting company. Got about 20, 25 employees. Our head office is based in Melbourne. going since about 1993, I think it is. Adrian and I have been there for almost 10 years now. We're sort of made up mostly of scientists and engineers, no accountants, no lawyers, which is probably why we haven't been a huge, tremendous success. But we try and do the things that we believe in, and those are looking at carbon and energy systems, and that's where this biochar work fits in. Also water and wastewater treatment, environmental impact assessments, social impact assessments, and aid and development projects. That's where our sort of key activities sit. We have satellite offices in other parts of the world, generally where we're trying to have an impact and create change. So there's a lot of activity at the moment in East Africa through our Rwanda office, and West Africa in Senegal at our Dakar office, and Southeast Asia through Vientiane in Laos. So there's a lot of activity in those areas at the moment, and a lot of it's, I guess, managed and controlled through head office here in Melbourne. Okay, a little bit about biochar. We actually sell the biochar that we create under this brand name Green Man Char. We're not really trying to make money out of it, but the thing is we were trying to get investment to promote and expand our production of biochar, and all of the people with money in their pockets were saying, yeah, but what's your market? Like, how big's your biochar market? Who's going to buy it? And we said, well, actually we don't know, but it's good stuff, so I'm sure people will. But that's not going to get you through the Shark Tank type interrogation. So we didn't really have any serious market data about who would buy biochar, how much they'd use, etc., how much the value of this biochar industry could be. So we could have hired some marketing people to do some surveys and ask people, have you heard of biochar? What do you use it for? Where do you buy it? Or we could just make a label, start selling it and see what happens, which I thought was a much better grassroots kind of market analysis than getting a consultant to do it for us. So that's what we've done with Green Man Char, and it's sold through a number of nurseries in Melbourne, and it's also sold online. And we also sell another byproduct from our process called wood vinegar, which is basically smoke water. So it's condensed smoke. Do people know what smoke water is? All right. When you've sat around a campfire and the wind has blown unfavourably and you've got a face full of smoke, it stings your eyes because it's basically little droplets of organic acid with some particulates as well. Lovely stuff. And a heap of carbon monoxide too, by the way. Anyway, when that blows in your face, it stings your eyes because it's acidic. And those acidic chemicals, when you condense them out, they form a sort of a tea-coloured liquid. It's got a pH of about 2.5, 3, something like that. So it's a reasonably strong acid. And it's all of these, I guess, products of incomplete combustion that are water-soluble that make up this material, this wood vinegar stuff. And it is the trigger that tells seeds, trees, seeds, plant seeds, grass seeds, whatever, hey, there's just been a fire, go for it, the coast is clear, right? That's really the chemicals that are in wood vinegar. That is what they signal to the plant world. And some Australian native species will only germinate when there's been a fire, because it's so hard to grow in Australia with the sort of conditions we have. They're just like, I'm not even going to bother until I know there's nothing left.
The banksia seeds and some acacias, if you you soak the seeds in that and then plant them after they've been soaking in it for a bit, or do you water a bit over them after you plant them?
The stuff that we produce, you would dilute probably to about 100 or 200 to 1, and then you would soak the seeds in it, and thereby pull the wool over the seeds' eyes, trick them into thinking there's been a bushfire, and then they'll germinate. But having said that, almost all plant species will have a seed. The seeds will be stimulated by the presence of these chemicals in the wood vinegar. So it's not just Australian natives, but almost anything you can stimulate to germinate through the use of this stuff. It's just that we think of it as being an Australian thing. So that's a byproduct, basically, the condensed smoke. The biochar, all of the different trials that we've done, we've shown that the biochar improves plant health, soil health, and you get more bang for your buck. If you are using commercial fertilisers but you've added biochar, the plants do better. It hangs on to water-soluble things longer. They don't drain out of the soil as quickly. So time and time again, you do the biochar versus no biochar experiment, and you find that the plants have grown quicker and have more vigour than when there's no biochar present. That's what it looks like under the microscope. So you can see there that the structure of the biochar is very much based on the structure of the woody biomass material from which it was derived. So the all those little nooks and crannies and holes and things, these are actually, that is poplar, that's willow, and that's poplar again. Those are invasive weed species that we've turned into biochar in that case. There's a tremendous amount of surface area. There's lots of nooks and crannies for soil microorganisms to grow in, and so it's like offering up an empty block of rent-free accommodation for soil microorganisms to move into. We've used the biochar for all sorts of different things over the years. We've been producing this stuff initially experimentally from about 2009 and commercially from sort of 2011, 2012. Applications fall into two broad ranges. One is you put it in the soil to help plants out, and the second is you feed it to animals. It has been shown to have some benefits in gut health for a lot of different animal species, chickens and cows in particular. But what we found is that when we take our biochar process to different parts of Australia, invariably, when you turn your back, something comes up and starts eating spilled biochar. So I've seen dogs eating it, chickens, cows. We actually found sheep were actually in the furnace one day when we got there. They were inside the furnace eating the spilled char off the floor, and kangaroos. So there seems to be some sort of instinctive understanding that it's good for you to eat this charcoal stuff, this biochar, and so a lot of animals do that. And there's certainly opportunities with feedlots and feed blends to improve animal health.
Pregnant cows will actually look for bones to chew on in a paddock just to get the phosphorus, calcium, because they're pregnant and they need it for their thing, and they instinctively do it. You know,
yeah, they know.
And that's when they get the anthrax, because they're digging up something that could have...
Yeah, they maybe don't know about anthrax, but animals seem to have a far greater understanding of what's good for them than we often give them credit for, I think. Oh, maybe just one other comment about this. We did, that middle picture up the top there is from the Northern Territory. We did a fairly extensive set of trials with biochar at a melon farming, a watermelon farming property, and they were just absolutely gobsmacked at the reduced rate of watering that they needed and how much quicker the melons and the zucchinis and the cucumbers grew. So it was a very impressive trial, that one. So the process by which we make the biochar is called pyrolysis, and as I said, it's basically heating up the woody material in the absence of oxygen. We do it in a big blue box that's based on a 20-foot shipping container. It's not really that complicated. I mean, okay, we're trying to get a patent, and well, we've got a patent in a couple of countries now, and it's all sort of sounds really fancy, but to be honest, it's just baking wood at 500 degrees until all you've got left is char. And, you know, when you think about it, there are all these big engineering projects about trying to extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Was it Richard Branson who set up some kind of award where he wanted somebody to develop a technology to remove the several hundred parts per million of CO2 from the atmosphere?
He wanted to use the eucalyptus oil as a biofuel for his planes.
That's
it was a $30 million competition.
$30 million competition. Did anyone send him a grass seed? Because that's all you need, honestly. We don't need any whiz-bang high-tech stuff. We don't need coal, carbon capture and storage on the back end of a power station that uses a quarter of the electricity the thing's producing. We don't need to pump liquefied high-pressure CO2 down into old oil wells or whatever. All you need to do is start making biochar. It's that simple. And you know what? If you made enough biochar, you could just put it in 44-gallon drums and bury it. Or even better, you could... there's some really big open-cut coal mines in the Latrobe Valley. I reckon if you filled them back up with biochar made from sustainable biomass, we'd probably be sort of back where we were before we started digging it up in 1925 and started burning it for power generation, I would think. Simplistic perhaps, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's not that difficult to freeze out atmospheric carbon from the carbon cycle simply by growing biomass sustainably and turning it into biochar. It's not that high tech. We're doing it in a shipping container at Manningham, for goodness sake. It's not hard.
What do you use to fire up the carbon?
Good question. Here's someone that understands a bit about greenhouse gas emissions accounting and leakage, perhaps. So what this is we're not just capturing carbon, we're also emitting carbon. And there are a number of sources that we emit carbon from in running our process. Number one is, well, the operator's got to drive to the site, so he's emitting carbon and driving to and from the site. Number two is we use a big yellow wheel loader to load the logs and branches into our furnace. And so that is burning diesel. That emits some fossil carbon to the atmosphere as well. The machine itself, because it's a batch-based system and you need to actually start it up and get a fire going, we have 2 diesel burners that we use to fire the machine up. One of them runs for about 15 minutes to ignite the load of biomass. The second one runs on and off throughout the entire run to ensure that at no point do we get any wood smoke being generated that's going to annoy the neighbours. We typically use somewhere between 10 and 20 litres of diesel when we process several tonnes of biomass into biochar. So there's a fossil fuel emission from that as well. And finally, we're not capturing all the carbon out of the biomass. Some of it is being emitted as combustion products from the process. So in the end, you generally end up with about 20% of the mass of carbon that was originally there is frozen out as biochar, which, by the way, lasts when it's made from woody biomass, typically 1,000 to several thousand years. So it doesn't last forever. It will eventually decompose and release that CO2 back into the environment over a long period of time. But it's bought us a little bit of time, at least, when you think about a climate emergency. We've got a couple of millennia to sort out our shit. What else was I going to say about that? I think it's interesting that a lot of archaeology is based around finding where the charcoal is from the old civilizations, because it's been around for that long that you can actually pinpoint previous human civilizations based on the charcoal still being there.
It's all based on terra petra in the Amazon?
Yes, terra petra was a type of, I suppose, an enhanced type of biochar that natives in the Amazon were using some thousands of years ago. And I suppose one of the challenges that we face today in terms of how to use the biochar to its best abilities as a soil amendment is that there's a bit of a several thousand year research gap on what they were doing versus what we're trying to do. But when you look into it a little further, you find that there are actually a number of different traditional farming practices in South America, also in Africa and in India, where they still create something that's a bit like terra petra, where they basically get all of the ash and the charcoal from their cooking fires and blend it with food wastes and animal manure and all sorts of other things, and have a bit of a recipe to close the loop on all of that material from which they've produced their food back to the garden plot they're growing their food in. Yeah, so it's actually... Oh, great. Nearly there. I'll move on.
Question first.
If I could ask a question. Part of the work of creating biochar is collecting the raw material.
Yes.
I know the company had an operation where they were using green waste. Is that still continuing? The green waste, from the council tip.
We use green waste from the council tip. However, it's not the green waste from curbside collection, because there could be anything in that stuff. The green waste that we use is the green waste from the council's own operations, which is the tree branches and prunings from their street trees and their parks and gardens waste. And with this machine, we don't take it chipped either. It's all in branches and logs.
Is that commercially successful?
Borderline, I would say. Look, the council saves a lot of money by sending it to us instead of sending it to landfill, and then we subsidise our operation through selling the biochar afterwards. What we'd really like is if the council bought some of the biochar and used it in their own parks and gardens activities as well. We haven't quite got there yet. So the machine produces a lot of heat and potentially can produce electricity as well. And if we were able to utilise those energy sources effectively, that also gives you more bang for your buck in terms of the emissions that are being returned to the atmosphere. There's some statistics there about the machine. I presume these presentations are made available to people afterwards if they want them?
Yeah, they will be, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So there's details about our particular process here, and also a continuous version that would work on chipped materials that we're developing at the moment for an overseas application. The thing is computer controlled. If it's raining and you don't want to stand out in the rain pushing the touch screen, you can sit in your car and use your mobile phone, smartphone to control it instead. We have a machine running in Hong Kong that we routinely log into from the office in Melbourne here and can take control of if we need to help out the Hong Kong operators if they've got any issues. So it's all very high tech. We've used the machine, transported it to all sorts of different parts of Australia, because one of the arguments we had was, well, if we can take the technology to the biomass and then return the biochar to the soil in that place, it's a better way of closing the loop than bringing all the biomass to a central point and making a big stockpile of biochar in one place. A variety of different feedstocks have been used over the years. Heat uses, it'd be great to use the heat to, say, heat a greenhouse, something like that. We've got a plan to use it to heat some animal enclosures as part of our Hong Kong project, actually. Or other forms of space or water heating are a good idea. Again, it's just a matter of trying to get the best bang for your buck, and if you can avoid the use of electricity or another fossil fuel for creating heat by using the heat from this machine, then it's another tick in the box in terms of emission reduction. Now, Adrian's put a bunch of pictures of waste sources here. I'm going to keep this fairly brief. We did try tyres once, worked really well, fantastic. They're not made from biomass, so we're not really doing any favours in terms of emissions here.
Have you done any laboratory examination? Any toxicity has left?
From the tyres in
Yes,
particular?
yeah.
No, we didn't. We just wanted to see what happened when we put tyres in and if our thermal process could have no emissions. So we measured the emissions from the stack, but we didn't measure the contents of the tyre residue. But I would imagine it's mostly carbon black with some zinc in it. That's not something that we normally do. We don't normally run tyres in it. Tyres are fantastic. In terms of carbon capture, the carbon's captured. It's not going anywhere. They're brilliant. From a carbon audit point of view, just put them somewhere where no one can set them on fire. You know, it's a horrible environmental catastrophe, these massive piles of tyres everywhere. But if you look at it completely from a greenhouse gas perspective, tyres and plastic bags are a really good way to store carbon. Counterintuitive, I know, and I'm not suggesting we do that, but I'm just trying to explain that it's a complex field.
So does that, after they've been biochar, could you use them as a soil?
No, it doesn't have any of the surface area or absorption properties that we wanted, so it wasn't particularly helpful. And we didn't get very much, actually, either.
And a curly one.
Is it useful for anything, like road surfaces?
Yeah, carbon black from tyres can be added as a it can be as a raw feedstock for road making and also for other carbon products if you can get the zinc out of it. But not particularly cost effective because you've got all the steel wire in there as well that you've got to get rid of, and it's not pure carbon, it's got other things mixed in with it, especially the zinc, some sulphur.
So if you burn those, if you biochar them, do you end up with steel?
Yes, you end up with a whole lot of rings of steel wire from the tyres, yeah.
Just rings it? It doesn't melt entirely, it's still rings?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm not suggesting that we make biochar out of tyres. It was just something that Adrian put a picture of there because we did try it once. Yes, at the back?
I've heard of someone nearby me who was trialling making biochar from bones from their butchery.
Excellent notion, yeah, because there's lots of minerals, particularly, as this gentleman was saying, the phosphorus content, lots of other trace elements that would be really good, yeah. And the Amazon dark earths and the African dark earths and things like this no doubt would have had bones as part of the mix that was in the biochar.
You was to do a baseline area and say you got a square metre, you dug it up and found out how many earthworms were in that bit, then you dug your biochar in there, left it a set amount of time and then dug it up and checked how many earthworms were in it. Would it be the same, or you?
No, we've done this. There's an ISO standard for this test called the worm avoidance trial, and you get a container and you split it in half and you do a control and a test, and you sprinkle the worms evenly across the top, and then you leave it. I think it's 48 hours. Then you put in a divider and see where they ended up. And in our case, all but half of a worm ended up in the biochar. There was one that got chopped, unfortunately, when we put the divider in, but all the rest of them were in the biochar and none were in the control soil.
Okay.
Yes?
Just wanted to know the extent to which regular kind of burnt wood, so from a bonfire or from a more efficient kind of wood burner in the home, would actually work with biochar?
Yeah, it works pretty well. It might not have quite the high surface area that we try and chase with our process, but it's certainly going to be pretty bloody good. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Can you use treated pine? And is there an effect in
No.
the soil?
No, you can't. I was actually going to mention this. I don't know, how much time have I got left? 4 minutes, all right. No, do not use treated pine. It's full of copper, chrome and arsenic. I think we're one of the few countries in the world that hasn't banned treated pine yet. But do not burn it under any circumstances. The biochar will end up with the copper and the chromium, and the arsenic will all go out into the air. Yes. Yes. Follow-up question.
I've actually had Adrian up to. I live in an apartment block. And we've got above-ground beds that are filled with just potting mix and they're 5 stories up. It's very inhospitable. And Adrian came and we did a little bit of a trial, although it's very unscientific.
Yep.
A bed with biochar and a bed with not, and there certainly is an appreciable difference. And that's in a very hostile environment. Can you talk a little bit about what sort of soils it's best applied to? I hear that it's better in poorer soils. Is that correct?
Yes. Look, I'm not a soil scientist. I'm an engineer, and this is getting a bit outside my remit. But my general understanding is that soils which have that drain excessively, so sandy soils that don't retain water or nutrients, respond very well to biochar, because suddenly you've got a sponge that can hold on to the things that the plants want to get to. That's my simplistic understanding. And also because of the ash component of the biochar, it's slightly alkaline, so it has a mild liming effect if you've got an acidic soil.
Be good for Western Australian soil.
Very good for Western Australian and some NT soils. Up the back?
2 questions. One is, when you were talking about, it's a carbon counting question, when you were talking about the amount of carbon that you emit by creating biochar, is that offset by the creation, by the end product of biochar? Have you done that analysis yet?
I'm not sure if I quite followed the question,
okay.
but
Do you use more carbon to create biochar than biochar itself?
No.
Safe?
No.
The second question is then, does biochar have to be sequestered and stay in the ground for it to have a drawdown impact?
Yes. I mean, don't burn it, because otherwise you've basically gone back to... Yeah. Yeah. No.
What about on top of agriculture, etc.?
Look, as long as it's not being burnt, it's going to decompose very, very slowly over several thousand years. So you've got your carbon captured for a while. It doesn't have to be buried, no, but it would generally provide its best benefit at the root zone of the plants.
There was a paper done a few years ago, and it said if all of Australia's organic waste, and that includes sewage, council waste, etc., was biochar, we'd sequester about 20% of our emissions annually. And that seems, others have said about 10% of our emissions or so on. So yeah, it's really carbon net negative.
Yeah, look, the key message is that you're taking carbon directly out of the atmosphere, provided you're growing a biomass material in a sustainable way. And it's not that complicated. We could all do it. And you're having a lasting, millennial length impact on atmospheric carbon. So I guess the message is, whether it's through Earth systems and our gear or anything else, if you can create it from a sustainable biomass source, you're having a long-lasting impact on atmospheric carbon.
2 more questions.
Are you thinking of upscaling that? That's obviously a very small unit. Any thoughts on that for councils, for example?
Yes. So we built a 20-foot based unit, 20-foot container based unit, because that's what we could afford. It's tremendously more economic to have a 40-foot high cube container, because the main cost is the operator's labour, and that doesn't change. So we could get 3 times as much biochar and process 3 times as much green waste for the same outgoing. So yes, upscaling it is a key thing for us to try and do. Yep.
I just wanted to make a follow-on point to the treated pine
railway sleepers also have cadmium in them because trains use cadmium in the brakes.
It's not just cadmium, it's also asbestos, and beyond that, it's not even that. The main one are the Stockholm 12, which is what I call all of the banned chlorinated pesticides that were dumped on the railway lines throughout Australia for many, many decades.
So I guess you just had railway sleepers as a possible
We've
option.
done railway sleepers in our process, but we had to rebuild the entire back end of the system at pilot scale to confirm that we could actually do it without creating emissions, because our standard machine wouldn't be able to deal with it.
That wasn't my question though, that was just a corollary.
Okay,
to
yeah,
that.
but
My
yeah, if
question
you've got
was-
railway sleepers in your garden and they're real railway sleepers from a real railway line that have been used, get them tested,
So don't
because
use
there
them
could
in
be.
your garden either. My question was, you mentioned the Northern Territory trials, are they published?
I think there's a reference to them on our website, and there was definitely an ABC Rural podcast about them,
Okay.
but I don't believe there's a peer-reviewed paper about it, no. Final take-homes. Okay, that's the business as usual, going to landfill with or without gas capture versus sending the biomass to a biochar process. So you're about 300 kilos of CO2 equivalent is captured and sequestered per tonne of biomass going in.